Hey there, Dr. Alan Christianson here. I want to talk about some big myths relative to natural desiccated thyroid. Let's talk a little bit and define what this stuff is. So it's been called NDT for short. Proper term is natural desiccated thyroid. Natural means that it's found from a natural source. And in prescription medications, that's pig thyroid, also called porcine thyroid. Desiccated, chopped up really fine. Now, in many cases, this category is referred to by one of the brand names. People might say Armour when they're referring to NDT. And Armour is one of the brands of desiccated thyroid, but that's kind of like Kleenex to facial tissues. So I'm actually not a fan of Kleenex brand. I like Puffs Plus. And over here, I like WP thyroid. So we'll talk about it, natural desiccated thyroid. So one of the biggest myths that comes up is that natural desiccated thyroid is not okay for those who have Hashimoto's as a principle. The argument goes like this. The claim is that taking thyroid, actual thyroid, ingesting it, will somehow raise your antibodies against your own thyroid. And that's obviously bad for those that have Hashimoto's. In fact, I've heard many doctors say that anyone with Hashimoto's can't take desiccated thyroid at all, or it can worsen their immune state. So let's back up and unpack all this stuff. So people who take thyroid do so because they have hypothyroidism. Their big gland is not making enough hormone. And those who have hypothyroidism almost universally have Hashimoto's. There's probably 97–99% overlap between hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's. So if those with Hashimoto's could not take natural desiccated thyroid, who would? They're the only real group. Now let's look at the concern about natural thyroid raising antibodies. Well, there's been a couple studies done on this exact topic, not from the recent past, but still studies nonetheless. And the three that I found from looking at this showed that, if anything, orally taking thyroid lowers your body's immune response against thyroid. So the model is that it's called oral desensitization, and it's actually the basis behind allergy shots and sublingual allergy treatments. If you take something in your body on a tiny amount on a regular basis, your immune system tends to become more tolerant of that same substance. And then clinically, I've had scores and scores of case studies to where someone had very high thyroid antibodies and erratic thyroid levels that came from that. And oftentimes the one change we made was switching to natural thyroid, and the antibodies came down and levels stabilized. And I've seen countless cases to where in the course of 6 weeks, 8 weeks, antibodies have gone from thousands down to 0 just by switching over to desiccated thyroid. So having said that, doesn't mean that every single person has their antibodies go away when they take it, but it certainly means that across the board it doesn't raise antibodies. Now another concern, this is more so from the medical world, is that natural thyroid's a poor choice because it's not standardized. It doesn't have consistent amount of hormone. So let's look at that one. The argument goes like this. Synthroid or synthetic thyroid is a better choice because it's synthesized. It's made to have set amounts of hormone, and it's more predictable how much T4 you're getting, or in the case of Cytomel, how much T3 you're getting. Okay, so desiccated thyroid comes in brands, remember? And there were more brands in the past than there are today. And it was more widely used in the past. So the turning point was in the late 70s, early 80s. And prior to that time, there was more doctors of all types prescribing desiccated thyroid than there were who prescribed synthetics. Now, the means of standardizing thyroid hormone used to be based upon iodine content. So if you take Synthroid, there's T4 in Synthroid, and the T4, that number 4, refers to iodine atoms. So if you measure the iodine content in the tablet, you can have a pretty good sense of the hormone content of the tablet, because there's no other iodine. There's no iodine from anything besides the active hormone. In the case of natural thyroid, however, there is iodine in the T4, the T3, the T2, but also in T1 and other versions of non-protein bound iodine. So you could standardize based upon iodine, but not always have the exact same amount of active hormone. That was a legitimate problem back in the 70s. There was a case report written up in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 1979, and the case report was of a very unfortunate scenario of a woman who was being treated with natural thyroid, and she was symptomatic, her blood levels were off. obviously her medicine did not have the expected amount of active hormone. It was a problem, it was a bad thing. And because of that, the guidelines were changed by which thyroid medications were standardized. So the new level of standardization became not about standardizing for iodine, but about standardizing for T3 and T4. So the idea about natural thyroid not being standardized, totally real problem during the Carter administration. Not a real problem today. And in fact, if we look even deeper than that, the synthetic versions of thyroid have had multiple recalls, upwards of a dozen in the last decade, because of just poor quality control and not being as well consistently manufactured. Natural thyroid, there's been, of all brands, there's been one voluntary recall by the manufacturers of Armour Thyroid in the last decade and a half. So it's had a better track record of fewer consumer returns and fewer issues that way. And then in terms of numbers, the synthetics are standardized to within 5% of prescribed recommended dosage. There are brands of natural thyroid that are standardized to 2% or less variability than targeted dosage. And that includes WP Thyroid, West Thyroid, and Nature Thyroid. Those brands all have better standardization than the synthetics have. So much for the standardized part. Now, the other one I hear a lot is that you must take it multiple times a day to have it work right. You know, in prescribing a medication, we have an abbreviation of QD for once daily and BID for twice daily and TID for 3 times daily. So many say you must take thyroid BID or longer or more frequently to have it work properly. And the logic behind that is based upon T3 absorption. So T3, which is found in natural thyroid, is absorbed and it peaks in about a 4 to 8 hour window after you take it. And many doctors have said, oh, because of that, you need to take this a couple times a day, otherwise you'll have it drop off. The problem here is there's a disconnect between absorption and metabolism. You know, how quickly it comes in and how fast it goes out. So how frequently you take a medication is really not based upon the absorption pharmacokinetics. It's based upon the excretion pharmacokinetics. And the excretion of T3 is between 1 to 3 days. So because of that, you can take it once a day and have consistent amounts in the cells, even though the blood level shifts after a dosage. So it works just as good taken once daily as it does twice daily. And in fact, it's better to take it once daily because thyroid hormones, you make them in a circadian rhythm. Your body itself releases the bulk of them in the late hours of night, early hours of morning. And the main principle is we want to mimic what the body would do when it's working well. And so taking it once daily in the morning or last thing before bed is the closest way to mimic your body's own function. Twice a day is pretty hard to do something twice a day away from food, but also you're not consistent with your body's rhythm. And it's not necessary based upon T3 excretion cycles. Now, another thing that comes up a lot is about T3, T4 ratios. Now, doctors will do a blood test and they'll see that the T3, T4 ratios are not ideal, and they'll want to adjust those. They want to have more T4, less T3, and they'll say that these ratios of natural thyroid make that not possible. So here's the thought. The T3, T4 ratios, once you're on a good dose, the T3, T4 ratios are more about your liver, your kidneys, your intestinal tract, your detox pathways. They're more about those things than they are about the dosage you're taking. But there's more often than not, someone's not on a good dose. And that itself will skew those ratios no matter what the ratios are when you're taking it. So what I mean by that is, if you're taking too much thyroid hormone, you will get rid of T3 faster than you get rid of T4. And if you're on too little thyroid hormone, you'll hold on to T3 longer than you hold on to T4. So many of the issues about ratios are more issues about dosage than they are about the medicine being wrong. And once the dosage is right, then if those things are not perfect, there are more issues about peripheral thyroid metabolism. So in terms of how the ratios are found in natural thyroid versus from the body, many have said that natural thyroid is a 4-to-1 ratio and humans need a 10-to-1 ratio. Well, the real question is, where are we talking about for this ratio? Do we mean what's in the thyroid, what's in the blood, what's in the cell? Where are we talking about? So our thyroid itself is about that same ratio as desiccated thyroid. And when we first take thyroid, the bulk of what we're ingesting gets bound up by carrier proteins anyway. So we have the ability to unbind and convert as we see fit. And if we're on a good amount for us and our bodies are working well, then we can use that properly. The pitfall is that if you're not on a good dose, but you try to adjust the T4 and T3 separately, then the body still is doing its best to adjust those, or it's not adjusting them right if it can't work well. So you can't fix a system that's not working right by trying to give it a better input. It takes fixing the system in either way. Here's another big thing that comes up a lot is about testing. So if someone's on natural thyroid and a doctor does a TSH, free T3, free T4, and T3 is too high. So this also can be an argument with that ratio. The doctor will say, oh, you need less T3 because that was too high. And the real problem in a case like that may just be the timing of the testing. So if the TSH was close to 1 at a healthy level, and yet the T3 was elevated and the T4 was normal, what that means is they did their blood test right after they took their tablet. That's all it means. And the blood levels are based upon a trough reading on the low point of the day, not the peak reading, the high point of the day. So within the hours after you take the tablet, T3 does look higher, but that's not what T3's reference range is. It's based upon that trough level. So take your blood test first and take your tablet afterwards, and that's more meaningful. But that's often a big part of that ratio discussion too. The last big myth or misconception about desiccated thyroid is that it raises reverse T3. And really this goes back to that same issue about ratios before. So if you're on too much thyroid, your body will compensate. And your body will compensate by converting more T4 into T3 than it would normally. So high reverse T3 in nearly all cases is more of an issue of the wrong dose than it is of the wrong medicine. So get the dose right, reverse T3 by and large fixes itself. Dr. Christianson here with you. Take great care. We'll talk again really soon. Bye-bye.